Hello and welcome back to Building on a Budget Models. I'm Thomas and this is the first part of the Renault Alpine A110 rally car in 124 by Hella. Before we start, here's the real car in action.
Jean-Claude Andrier à 26 secondes.
It's amazing to see how this rear engine, rear wheel drive car handled so well on the snow and ice. When it came to the model, I first looked at the bodywork. It's a pretty crisp and clean moulding considering its age, about 50 years, but there are quite a few mould lines which I went to firstly with the edge of the craft knife blade. These are in quite prominent places, such as above the wheel arches, on the front and the rear of the car. I removed most of the obvious imperfections and then primed this using fine grey primer from Tamiya. I find that priming is an important part of the bodywork preparation as it will show up some of the imperfections which you may have missed when going over with the craft knife or sandpaper. I then used some 400 grit sandpaper to smooth over these areas. It's also important to check around any of the edges as there may be a bit of flash. Now there are also some raised areas on this, such as the Alpine A logo, which you can see here near the bonnet cover. However, these didn't match up to the shape and size of the decals, so I decided to sand these off as the decals look a bit more realistic. Now before priming and painting, there was one more part of the body which I needed to add, this rear section here. Don't know why, but this came as a separate part, which first needed to be sort of fitted properly, and then there were two slats like this. Now these didn't have any pinpoints, just some loose lines to show you where they needed to go. I think this is where this kit does show its age, that if this was a more modern kit there would have definitely been a groove or a pinpoint or something like that to make sure that you got it into the right place. And then, when fitting it here, you needed to get those two blue parts angled correctly so that they would line up with the engine cover opening, as you can see here. Once primed, it was given 3 coats of Tamiya TS54 light metallic blue. This is a lovely colour and also what Tamiya recommend to colour their version of this kit. It was then time to move on to the engine. I started by using a little bit of Tamiya extra thin poly cement for this. However, the engine parts didn't really have pins and were just kind of put together on contact, and I found that the Tamiya extra thin wasn't quite strong enough, so I moved on to using super glue to do some of these parts instead. I think again this is a way that the kit shows its age, that these parts would go together in a much different way if it was a new kit. The gearbox is done in Revell iron, whereas the engine block is done in Revell semi-gloss black. There were then other parts which were done in Tamiya aluminium. As I said before, superglue was very useful here because there were no connecting points for many of these parts to go. The top of the engine casing here has got a nice little A logo on to show that it's an Alpine. These sections on the side, which I believe are part of the carburettor system, do have little pins, but they're very, very small. I found that you had to make sure that they were dry before adding any paint to them or moving on to the next part. Also, there were some small parts that needed to go into the top for some of the wiring. These parts here were done in Tamiya silver. You will be able to see some of these parts as this car does have an opening engine cover, so it's important to add some details and make this look as nice as possible. This, I believe, is the oil filler cap, which was done in gloss British Racing Green, and then I went on to do the timing belts, which were done in matte black with a little bit of aluminium. I used a little bit of matte black as well on the end of a cocktail stick to go inside these kind of trumpet valves to make it have a simulation of depth. Now, the instructions here say that there are pinholes for the timing belts to fit in place. However, there aren't. Whether these were accidentally filled up or a mistake in the instructions, I'm not sure. So I decided to use a drill and open up these holes a little bit and then to superglue it there. Very strange though that the instructions are clearly wrong. I then removed the spark plug wires from the rubber sprue. As I said in my unboxing video, it's a nice feature to have these. However, the wires weren't all the same length, and I found that I had to cross them over a little bit to fit them all into the correct holes. The thin tweezers were very useful for this job. You might be able to see here that one of them is much longer and had to cross over another one to fit in. I used a little bit of super glue on the main distributor cap, but the others just stayed in the holes quite nicely. I then added a little bit of matte black to cover up the top of the distributor cap. The decals now, the first one here is a very, very, very tiny ELF logo which goes on the top of the oil filler cap. At some point I added the exhaust pipes, but I think I must have forgot to record it, but there they are. And I then gave a little bit of black panel line accent just to kind of dirty up the engine a little bit and give it a semblance of a bit of depth as well. It's now time to do some of the wheels. Each one was made of two parts, the outer rim and the spokes. I did them all in gloss silver, and then the spokes I did in orange and picked out the centre hub and the three wheel nuts using a little bit of iron. The tyres are actually different sizes for the front and rear, so make sure you get this right. I use a little bit of super glue just on the inside, and I'm pretty happy with how these look. There is also a Michelin logo on the outside of the tyre, but not on the inside, so make sure you get it round the right way. In my research I noted that they didn't always use these orange wheels, but I thought it was a nice flash of colour. Here you can see that the rear tyres are slightly fatter, so yeah, make sure you get them the right way round. Now time to build up the front wheel axles. These are built in such a way that you can steer the wheels slightly. There are ways of doing it so that the wheels will rotate as well. However, I decided that I just wanted them to be strong, so I superglued these together. There is a very small disc brake caliper which goes onto the front here. I think that's what it's supposed to be anyway. You can't really see any of these parts once the bodywork is on, but it's nice to know that it's there. I tried painting the shock absorbers red and then getting a little bit of silver paint on the inside. However, this didn't quite work, so I had to go over with a little bit more red afterwards. There are nice holes to fit these into place, and most of them were pretty secure. You don't want to glue the wheel parts in here so that they will still turn when this is all assembled. As you can see here, most of the holes were a good size and they didn't fall out. There were more pinholes to put this part of the steering mechanism in. I painted the front of this floor section in the same bodywork blue and then the inside in flat aluminium. There was then this bar here which just clipped onto both sides of the wheels so that you could give it a slight steer. This feels a bit wonky compared to some modern kits, but it's still a nice feature considering the age of this kit. There's then a framework which goes around the engine. This is made up of 4 parts, all done in semi-gloss black. Using the lines on your cutting mat can be really useful here to sort of get the angles all at right angles and to make sure that it will fit properly. There's 2 pinholes for this to fit into the top of the gearbox, which again is helpful. Would be better if there were more places like this on the kit. Now the rear shock absorbers should really have been done in more than just silver, however I wasn't looking at the instructions correctly, but it doesn't really matter as you won't see these parts anyway. The axles I did in semi-gloss black, and then the disc brakes I also did in silver. I put these together with a little bit of Tamiya Extra Thin and then glued them onto the wheels. Like I say, just like the front, you can fit these in such a way so that they rotate, but I decided I just wanted them to be strong. I then used some super glue to glue them to the gearbox, and I was really happy and checked that they were both the same height so that you didn't get any three-wheeler situations. Just like the engine, I had a little bit of black panel line wash here to add a little bit of kind of grease, dirt and shading. There are some really nice pinholes here, including this slot which the exhaust pipe fits through. I used a little bit of super glue here, and with a bit of light pressure it fit in nice and securely. There are these 2 white sections which go either side of the engine. I don't actually know what these are, so if you do know what they are, they're sort of rectangular, please let me know. There were then these sort of covers which go around the wheels, which were done in matte black. There's some of these to go on the front wheels, which I'll add later as well. And now that this was all finished, I decided to test it with the body cover on to see how it fit. It doesn't meet up quite properly at the front, so I'm going to have another look at this to see whether there's anything I've put in the wrong place. But most of that front section will be covered with bumpers, fog lights and the number plate as well, so I'm pretty happy with how it looks so far. And certainly the blue, I think, is a real spectacular point. Please let me know in the comments section how you think I got on. Subscribe, like, hit the bell icon, and I'll see you soon.